And I took that mindset into it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do one a week. And no matter what, I'm going to do at least one a week and commit to it. Decide why are you doing it and what you want to accomplish. And for me, the why was I want to talk about the outdoors and I want to talk about Jesus in the same place. Because in my writing, I can't do that. Peterson's Hunting is not going to publish about God, right? And Sports Field's not either. There's not one out there. So I'm like, well, everybody that I know are people of faith in the outdoor industry.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Right.
They're overwhelmingly more Christians than there are not. And they don't have a platform either. So let me give them a platform, and it's, I just love it. I do. I love sitting here and hearing everybody's stories. I really.
Welcome back to the RedBeard Outdoors podcast. I'm Jonathan, your host, and here at RedBeard Outdoors, I talk about faith, family, fitness, and the outdoors. And today, I'm really excited to bring you Pete with the Christian Outdoors podcast. Now, you guys know that I'm LDS, a member of the Mormon church, whatever you want to call it. We are Christian. We follow Christ. And I've spoken about my faith before. The Christian Outdoors podcast is very outspoken, obviously, even in the title of their podcast about their faith. This isn't a faith-only podcast, so stick around, even if maybe you're not part of any kind of religion or faith. I definitely want you to hear what Pete has to say. He is a gentleman that's got a lot of faith. He has a lot of history in hunting and the outdoors. He's a very active individual, and he just loves sharing everything that has to do with nature with the people around him, whether it be getting outdoors to fish, to hunt, to spend time with his family. Just absolutely loves it. And that's why I wanted to get Pete on. He also had me on his podcast, so I recommend definitely going and checking that one out as well over on the Christian Outdoors podcast. Appreciated that invitation and wanted to bring him on to my podcast as well. So with that being said, guys, definitely check this one out. You're going to really enjoy it. Pete has a different point of view than some of the people I've had on in the past. He has many years in the outdoors. It has changed his life literally, and we'll get into all of those stories with you guys today in this one. So stay tuned. Before we get into the conversation, I do want to remind you that we have a over $2,000 giveaway for archery equipment. It ends the end of June. So if you're watching this or listening to this on Saturday or Sunday, the end of June, go get entered. The link is down below. Just a couple more days to get in. I want to be able to give back to you. I really appreciate all the support that you guys have given me as this continues to grow with the RedBeard Outdoors podcast and you guys as the audience. So thank you so much for that and for the support. With that being said, let's get into this conversation here with Pete and Christian Outdoors podcast. Welcome back to the RedBeard Outdoors podcast. I'm Jonathan, your host, and today we've got an outstanding guest. We're going to dive into some topics, guys, today that I haven't really gone really deep into, and I'm really excited about that. I was on Pete's podcast, which is the Christian Outdoor podcast. He's got a bunch of other stuff going on. He's just an overall blue-collar, hardworking dude that loves the outdoors, loves hunting, loves getting outside and sharing that with his family as well and loved ones, and that's why they started the podcast over there, but also as a faith-driven man. And that's something that I highly respect in an age where it seems like they're trying more and more to push Christianity and just God or even a higher power in general out of the equation in so many things. And so we're going to dive into some of those topics. Of course, the faith, family, fitness, and outdoors as always. So with that being said, Pete, who are you for people that don't know who you are?
Wow, that's a big question there, Jonathan. Thank you for having me first. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. As you said, I'm Pete Rogers. I live in South Carolina. Been an outdoor writer for 25 years, writing for hunting and fishing magazines. Most any hunting magazine that you've read, I've been in there at one time or another. But in 2019, I started Christian Outdoors podcast, and it has been really blessed and has grown so fast, Jonathan, that my writing has had to figure out something to take off the table. And it was a really struggle, because I really enjoy the writing for hunters and anglers and trappers. my real job is I'm a trapper for the USDA. So I had to table that a little bit, or at least back way off and just own that. But yeah, I've been writing for a long time and started Christian Outdoors podcast in 2019, and it's doing great. I mean, it just really is. It's just hard to believe just how fast it's grown in the last year and a half. We've added almost 1.5 million followers just in the last year and a half. So it's really exploded. And as you know, the faster it grows, the more work it takes. Right.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, that's pretty much who I am. I have 5 children, and they're all grown now. I have a daughter that graduates her school in April the 8th. So that'll be the last one through college and everything. And all of them's married off except her. So she's available if anybody's listening to this. I should have her picture up.
That.
She's not going like that at all. So I hope she doesn't hear this. Oh, she's a great girl, though. She really is. But that's pretty much who I am, man. I love the outdoors. I love Jesus, and I love talking about both of them. So
awesome. Perfect. Well, that's a great introduction, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm not big on reading. I've got a pile of magazines that I should probably read, but I get them in the mail, and I just put them on the shelf, right? And I'm not great at that because my time reading is spent on, I guess, less fun items that I actually have to go through and research and do all that. But that's awesome that you started there. And then you moved into podcasting, and that there's been so much growth that's taken over what you do. So, with that being said, obviously in the title of your podcast, the Christian Outdoors Podcast, I would like to know. Well, first, I want to take over here for a second and address something that you asked me here at the beginning, and it's not. I don't ever get offended by it. I don't get upset by it. I actually love when I get this question. But we were talking about what are we going to talk about on this podcast. I don't do scripts, so people don't think that I do that. But, guests like to know what we're talking about. And I like to just fly by the seat of my pants. And and so I said, we're going to talk about faith. And you mentioned, well, I'm not LDS. Is that okay? And for me, it's something that I guess, again, growing up in it, whatever it is, whether you're a hunter, whatever you grow up in, you're used to that group of individuals. And like for me, I know LDS is a form of Christianity because we believe in Christ, our Lord and Savior. He has a Father and the Holy Ghost. So you could say the Trinity, however you want to label that. But we are Christians. And so I wanted to establish that right off the bat so that people that are listening and maybe fade out later in the podcast, before that happens, I wanted to address it head on. LDS, Mormon, whatever you want to call it, is a version of Christianity. We don't worship a man. We worship Christ and the Lord, the Lord, our Savior Christ, and his Father, Heavenly Father, whatever you want to address him as, God, Elohim, whoever. And so that's where we're at. So I just wanted to establish that right off the bat. We are definitely a Christian faith. So with that being said, where did you find your faith? Were you raised in it? Being from the South, I imagine right there in the Bible Belt.
Actually, a little surprising. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I am. It's one of the things I talk about a lot when I get to go speak at different places. Is I was not raised in church. Actually, my dad, he liked to move a lot. So, Jonathan, I'm from South Carolina. I think you said you were originally from North Carolina, but I was born in Tennessee, in Chattanooga. But by the time I was 12, I'd lived in every state in the South except Mississippi.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, we moved a lot, and many times more than once within that state or within that town. And it was, we would move, and when we got somewhere, Dad would kind of find a church around, and we would go once or twice till he made his connections. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not putting my dad down. Okay. Not at all. He passed away a long time ago, but we had a good relationship. So this is not slamming my father. Okay. It was just, I guess that was his norm. Okay. But my sister's 9 years older than me. I'm the youngest of 3. And when I was 12 and we were living in Charlotte, South Carolina, she started going to church. She was dating a guy who was going to church. So she invited me to go with her. And it was awesome. So I started going with her. I really didn't have very much exposure to church. I mean, like I said, we'd go a little bit it was less than a C and E, right? Christmas and Easter. It was less than that. And I started going with her. And while I was going with her on a Wednesday night, this little bitty church is kind of a cool story, so I'll make it quick. The building was so small. Okay. It was only 12 pews, including the choir. Okay. Wow. It was tiny. It was probably 400 square feet. Right. I never understood why they had a sound system. I tend to think the volume will get Satan out of you or something, I guess. I don't know what.
You could whisper into the microphone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You didn't need it. You could just have a regular conversation. But one Wednesday night, and I accepted Christ as my Savior there. I was 12 years old, and I think it was in April-ish of 1976. That's how old I am. And we moved again in June, but my sister got married and stayed behind. So my avenue to church went away again. And we lived way out in the country in Saluda, South Carolina. And we lived out there for about a year and a half, 2 years before we moved into town. When we got into town, I was now going to the town school. And I had met a bunch of buddies who were going to the local Baptist church, and they invited me to go to the youth group. And I started going to the youth group, and I just started going on my own. And then Mom started going with me after a while. And it was while I was there that I felt the call to go into the ministry while I was at that church. So I didn't grow up in church per se, like from childhood on, like my children did and your children are. As my daughter says, I don't remember not ever believing in Jesus because she's always been in church her entire life. But that was not my story. I came to it as a young teenager and have stayed because I found something that I needed, and it was important.
I love it.
So
I love it. That's a cool story. And yeah, being from the South, anyone that has been in the South or, is around the South at all understands what I mean by, it's the Bible Belt. There's a church on every corner.
Every corner.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's worse than CVS, right? It's, there's a
or Dollar General over here, worse than Dollar General.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting here is being here in Utah, it's similar where, but it's a lot of LDS churches, but like our neighborhoods are built, it seems like around the church buildings. And I mean, I don't mind it because there's cool parks and stuff that the kids can go through. But no, it's definitely in a lot of places. So, but yeah, growing up in the South, you drive by, I don't know how many churches before we'd get to our church. And it's interesting to hear, different stories on how people come about their faith and joining a church. And so, finding your own way is huge because as a child, you grow up and you rely a lot on your parents' testimony. You follow basically that or an older sibling of some sort or an uncle, there's an adult-ish figure or an older figure that you follow in their footsteps, and you gain your testimony through that. Most of the time, if you are following that, you kind of have a falling out because you find your own path. That person is no longer available, moves away, maybe passes away, unfortunately, whatever it may be. And then you have to find your own. You have to stand on your own two legs. And you're a little shaky, a little wobbly. And then you either, most people come back eventually. Some people take 10, 15 years. Some people take 8 years. Some people take 6 months, whatever. But it's always cool to me to hear those different stories because everyone does have their own path. And it's not something that I love about Christianity in general is, and just the way of following Christ in general is, it's not about being perfect now. And that's what bothers me so much sometimes when people stress that you have to wear a suit the first time you go to church or anything like that. And for me, it's not like that at all. I'd rather you show up in your PJs, and you're going to feel uncomfortable. If you show up in your PJs, you probably will feel uncomfortable. But,
and mine should, but that's okay. If that's what you have, then come on.
Exactly. But as you progress, you'll notice people will start to be maybe a little bit more clean shaven, or they'll, take care of their beard a little bit better, or they'll wear their nicer suit. They'll wear a button up shirt. It'll progress. It's very similar to, as you find your testimony and the things that you you start to follow. Maybe your language changes a little bit. Maybe the way you
Mm-hmm.
eat or take care of your body changes a little bit. But it's a progression. And that's what I love about Christianity in general, is that it's not that you have to be perfect right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that you have to drop everything cold turkey and just stop. But as you find your testimony and your faith in Christ, he calls to you in different ways. And maybe that's for you to go
Right.
serve a mission. Maybe that's for you to serve your community. Maybe that's just simply to clean up your life and affect your nuclear family, whatever it may
Mm-hmm.
be. But that
Mm-hmm.
there is a constant progression in faith,
Mm-hmm.
so that eventually you do
Right.
become perfect and you become like him.
Right. And that's exactly right, Jonathan. It's the way I phrase it is that Christianity is not an event; it's a journey. Now, maybe getting saved or being born again, if you want to use those terms, may be an event for you, but then that's when the journey begins. That's the journey towards sanctification or towards perfection, as John Wesley said. I'm striving towards perfection. Even though I haven't reached it yet, I'm still working towards perfection all the time, and hopefully one day I'll be able to obtain that. But when we start to think that Christianity is an event and we forget that it's a process or a journey, it's a lifelong journey as we grow closer to Christ every day. Whenever we, as Paul said, I'm the worst sinner of all, right? And I fail all the time, but I try. But and because as it says in Corinthians, his grace is sufficient and made perfect in our weakness, right? So we're going to make mistakes. That doesn't make us a failure, right? It's God really appreciates effort, in my opinion. And the more effort we can put forth, then the easier the journey becomes, I believe.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's interesting because someone such as Paul, he's one of my favorite apostles. Not only did he write a ton of the New Testament, and I love seeing how he addresses different people, and he
Right.
recognizes their needs. Like, he doesn't hold everyone to the same standard, because he can recognize where they are at, and he holds them to a
Right.
higher standard than where they're currently at, but not to maybe his own personal standard. And you
Right.
notice that as people go through life and they progress through their faith, they hold themselves to a higher standard each time. Maybe right now they are, they maybe they drink, they curse like a sailor, they are dressed terribly, they, whatever, all the things that you could think of that would mark a person as maybe not Christian, or not, maybe the beginning of their faith. And as you progress, Paul would probably say that if he cursed once, that would be a major sin for him, versus,
Right.
where he was when he started, he was literally killing and hunting down Christians. Like,
I've
he
come a
was
long
the
way,
best
baby.
he was the best
Yeah.
of the best at that. And I don't think people
Yeah.
recognize that he was the best at what he did. And
Yeah.
it's crazy that God chose someone like him that was literally, I mean, he was the best hunter. If we want to address it, he was a hunter of people, and he would find clues and track them and this and that. He would go for miles and countries just to find these Christians. And he flipped from that to becoming one of the most adamant and strong apostles of Christ, and write again most of the New Testament. I mean, those letters that he wrote are just amazing.
Yeah. And you make a very good point, because one of the things that I learned in seminary that made sense to me is that when you read, say Corinthians versus Colossians or Galatians, he is writing for a specific group of people, or to a specific group of people, addressing a very specific issue, right? And it is a first century document, and we have to be careful that we don't try to take a first century document and impose it on a 21st century world. We've got to go the other way around. We take a 21st century world and see what the first century document says to us. So when Paul says in First Corinthians that, God, it just flew out of my brain there. That women should go to church with a hat on, with their head covered, right? Well, there was a reason in that culture at that time that needed to take place, right? And when we cherry pick things like that out of the Bible and we try to impose it on certain things, then we have missed the whole point of the story, right? Why did you pick that of all things that you're gonna that you're going to hang your hat on,
Exactly.
the pun intended there. I mean, why did you choose that? Say, well,
Mhm.
you're sinning if you don't go to church without your head covered. Of
Mhm.
all the other things Paul said, that's what you're going to hang your hat on. I mean, really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No,
So,
I love hearing stuff like that because people go to the Old Testament and they'll cherry pick things out and
oh,
it's like, well, it's different, and you got to take context into it as well. If you read that
mm-hmm,
entire section for Colossians or Corinthians, or
mm-hmm,
it's not that he's saying that every woman, like you said, it's the culture, that specific culture, that head covering had a meaning. That would be like
mm-hmm.
going to Samoa and saying that everyone has to, wear pants because in Utah they wear pants with suits. Like, no,
Yeah,
they wear, I don't know the name of the skirt, or it's not a skirt, it's a toga or something along those lines. I'm going to mess that up, so I apologize. But the way they dress is very different from the way we dress here in Utah. And so,
right,
telling them that they have to wear what we have to wear is just because Paul said it, thousands of years ago.
right. To
It
the
doesn't
people at
make sense.
Corinth, he didn't
Yeah,
say that to
exactly.
Galatia or to
Exactly.
Colossae, however you say that. I can't say that word
Mhm.
very well. Or to the Philippians. He said it to the Corinthians because there was an issue that he was
Mhm.
addressing to the Corinthians.
Exactly.
And I think it's really important when we read, especially Paul's letters, that when we read them, that we understand that cultural context as well as the spiritual context.
Yep.
Right? It's just very important, again, to make sure we don't try to take a first century document and impose it on 21st century world. We got to do it the other way around. We got to take a
Mhm.
21st century knowledge and experience and reason and interpret what the first century document means for us today.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's
Mm.
too many people just they'll take things out of context, and again, not
Mm-hmm.
even just in faith or the Bible or whatever it may be, book that you're reading. It's in everything. A
Yeah,
comment that you
politics
see on
is
social
really good.
media,
The
politics, or
news, yeah.
yeah. And now you don't even know what's being made by AI. Like, there's my son showed me a clip the other day. Um, this guy was having it was like a gotcha moment. And I looked at him, I said, "You do realize, like, that dude never said that to this guy, right?" And I only knew that because I had seen the same thing. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then I looked it up. I'm like, that was done by like an AI clip where they took this and that and they formed a clip just to get this channel likes or whatever on YouTube.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my son was like, "Wait, really?" I was like, "Yeah, like those two people did speak at one time, but they weren't talking about that subject, and they clipped it from, that's why you didn't see like a panorama of them in the same room. It was a clip here and a clip
Mm-hmm.
there, and they just happened to be responding to very similar topics." So, there's so much of that nowadays that it's hard to tell. But going back to, we've gone way down. Dude, I could talk all day about
We
Paul.
do that
Paul is
all
one of
day
my
long, man.
favorite. Yeah, Paul is one of my favorite people in the Bible, outside of
Mm-hmm.
Christ. Obviously, he is one of my favorite, like what I would consider real human beings that that
Mm-hmm.
actually I could relate to a little bit more than Christ,
Right.
because he was such a devastating person to the Christians, and going from that to being one of the best leaders. Like, can you imagine being in a church where you heard about Saul, and they didn't have photos and Instagram and stuff back then, obviously, so news didn't travel with photos, right? So they didn't have a photo of Saul, like, are you sure that's Paul? Like this, but I'm sure they had descriptions of him and who he was and what he did, and news traveled fast via word of mouth. And so, can you imagine him walking into your church, your Christian church, and seeing him come in and being like, "Oh crap," and then him turning around and preaching to you about how he's
Yeah,
changed
because
his life?
you'd think when he
Oh my
walks in, this is
gosh.
fixing to be a bad day. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what you
like, oh
think.
man, we're
He's
about to be
fixing to be a
stormed, like
bad
we're
day.
dead, we're done, and
Yeah,
then he starts
yeah.
preaching about his faith in Christ. Like, it's stuff like that that doesn't get written down in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we have a book called the Book of Mormon. I won't go way into it, but essentially it was brass and gold plates that were etched out during similar times of the New Testament, but here in the Americas. We'll just leave it at
Mm-hmm.
that. That's a brief summary of it. But I laugh because I'm sitting there thinking one of the prophets in there, his name's Nephi. And Nephi had kids, and he, lived a normal life, whatever normal was back then. But to think that he melted this plate down, so it wasn't even paper, it was melted down to form a plate that he had to etch into, and they wrote in what was called Reformed Egyptian. So it wasn't even like letters. It was hieroglyphs that he was drawing.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be somewhat of an
Mm-hmm.
artist, right, to be able to write. And to think that he was sitting there etching that out by a campfire, and then I can only imagine him like trying to write something down, and then his son running up and giving him a hug or bumping him or something, and him like, ah, you know?
I gotta start over.
and he not only start over, but having to melt it down to form the plate, and like being at the bottom of the page, right, and that happening, being like,
Yeah.
oh, you know? But I love taking these figures out of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and making them human, because they really
Mm-hmm.
were, and like,
Yeah.
and that makes it more relatable for people, to
Mm-hmm.
to see them, again, going back to Paul, just someone who was so devastating and flipping his mind to where he was one of the leaders
Mm-hmm.
of the church. Like, his story blows my mind. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. It really is.
Yeah. So with that being said, how do you relate your faith with your love for the outdoors, with your passion for what is hunting, what is fishing, and everything else that you do outdoors?
Mm-hmm.
How do those two coincide for you?
Well, I think like a lot of people, Jonathan, that I feel close to God in nature. I do. Um, Now I want to be clear that I don't let that substitute for going to church. Okay.
Mhm.
But I feel close to God in nature. I'm constantly in awe of all the things that he has made and of his creation and of his creative power. And it's very humbling. I talked about this last Saturday night, is that it's very humbling when you can sit on the mountaintop and look at how beautiful the creation is, with snow covered mountains or big valleys or a glacier or whatever it is. And you're looking at that and you're just like, my goodness, this is just so breathtaking. And then to realize that of all the things that God has created, we're the most significant of all of it, because we're made in his image.
Mhm.
Right. And that humbles me every time I go out. And whenever I'm watching a deer walk across the field that I have no intention to shoot, or if I'm listening to a turkey gobble, which is turkey season right now, and I'm going tomorrow, um, and whatever it is that excites me about that, I'm constantly reminded that as cool as this is and as wonderful as this is out here in nature, that I am the signature on his masterpiece, because I'm made in his image. And for me, it's a constant reminder every time I'm out in nature of just how God's creative power is so impressive to me, and it's
Mhm.
so inspiring. It doesn't matter. Like right now, we were talking about pollen season. Yeah, you can't breathe. It's on everything here in the South. It's just, that's one of our 6 seasons is pollen, and the rest of the world may have 4 seasons. We have 6 down here, and pollen is where we are now. And then we have summer, and then fall, and then another summer, and then fall, and then summer, and then we have December, and then summer. It's just always hot down here, right? But even when all that stuff is, and as we complain about it, you realize that what the pollen does is it makes everything bloom,
Mhm.
right? And so even with the things that we get frustrated with, it's still awe inspiring for me to realize how intricately created all this stuff is, and that he spoke it into being. That's just amazing to me, that God said, and it was. God said, and it was. Read that in Genesis 1 and in 3. God said, and it was. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let the heavens shine with the lights in the heaven, and to separate day from night, and it was. Let the plants come on the ground, and it was. And it's just like he spoke all this into being. Just makes me even more in awe of just how awesome God is.
Brief interruption here, guys. Just want to remind you that you are invited to come and join us over at the First Phorm Outdoors Facebook group. I would love to have you there. Let them know RedBeard sent you. It's an amazing group of individuals that you will find everything from hunting to fishing to people of faith to people that enjoy pounding the pavement, running marathons, and everything in between. Guys, go and join the group over on Facebook. I'd love to see you in there, and you're going to find your people there. That's all I've got to say about that. And with that being said, let's also remind you that right now is the best opportunity for you to continue that growth that you've had, that maybe in your diet or your fitness or whatever you were doing to get your beach body or whatever ready. Maybe you fell off the bandwagon a little bit here. We've got some big things coming here with First Phorm. Pay attention to that so that you can get in and continue those changes, that transformation that you started to get ready for the summer. Let's keep working it through the summer, the fall, and be ready for hunting season here in the fall. And then, of course, through the winter, not put on those pounds that you're going to have to take off to go back to summer next year. So stay tuned for that, guys. Really excited to bring that to you. Now, with that being said, let's get back to the conversation here with Pete. Right. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And that's an interesting way that you phrase, you spoke it into being, because I've always looked at it that way as well. And obviously there's a big like motivation thing going around social media. There's always different types of motivating speakers, but I will say that it reaffirms my faith for me that we are his children, because we can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Because when you say something and then you go act on that, you can make it happen. It may take a year, it may take 2 years. We're not as powerful as God here.
It's not quite as powerful. He said it and it was. Yeah, not quite that.
Right. Yeah, that it just happened. But, there's so many times where I've said it, and there's a guy that he's the owner of First Phorm, Andy Frisella. He's rough around the edges. Absolutely love what he teaches, though. And he is just a blue collar guy, has built up this company and many other companies that he's now a part of. But he says the same thing. He says, I spoke it and it happened. Like I thought it, turned that thought into words and those words into actions, and it happened. And, it's interesting to me that the Bible puts it that way, that he spoke it and it was, because I personally, and this is me putting my own understanding and interpretation on that, take that as he didn't just say it and the words turned into something. He taught us through example by creating those things. And again, this is going off over here, but seeing how even our body functions makes me picture God as the ultimate scientist in a way. If you want to put a word to it, that we have formed the word science. It is his priesthood. It is his power that he has. The fact that our heart can beat at the right second, at the right moment to make the blood flow, that our
at the right pressure system, and everything.
Exactly. That our electric system from our brain, I don't even really have to think the thought of moving my arm or moving my lips. It happens, right? All of those things blow my mind, and we're catching up by science studying things, but there's so many things that we don't understand. And going back to what you're saying, he spoke it and it happened. It appeared. I imagine him teaching us those same principles in a way. And that's what we can do. That's why you can't just sit back and think, man, it'd be nice to have XYZ thing. But if you say, hey, I'm going to do this step and that step and that step and that step, you will accomplish those things, because that is the power that you're putting behind your words. And
there's a lot more, excuse me for interrupting you there. There's a lot of evidence that says that if you write down your goals, you're like 90% more likely to actually pursue them and achieve them than if you just think them. Right. So if you, say, I want to start a podcast. Well, there's a process, as you and I both know, to starting a podcast. You don't just start talking, right? You got to plan and prepare and do your research and get the right equipment and figure out the platform that you're going to be on and blah, blah, blah. But if you write it down and say, as I did, and I'm just using me as an example, in October, I'm going to start my podcast. And I started preparing that a year and a half ahead, and preparing myself and studying and researching and listening to podcasts about how to do podcasts and just trying to make sure, Because I like to, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to commit my time to it. I want to do the very best I can. I think that's what we're supposed to do as stewards of what God has given us. Our life is finite. It will end. We just don't know when. So my time is the most valuable thing I have. So if I'm going to commit my time to something, then I want to commit it 110%. And do the very best I can, because I think that's what God calls us to do, is to be the best that we can at whatever we decide to pursue. Another thing that goes along with that, Jonathan, is the reason that you have different dreams than I do, and you have different goals, and I've said this to all my children, is because I believe that the dreams or goals that we have are God's way of showing us our full potential. You can do this. You wouldn't have dreamed it if I didn't believe in you. It's God talking to us, right? So this came to your mind because I know you can achieve this. You just have to believe in yourself and put forth the effort, and I'll be there to help you along the way. And so when we have these goals and dreams, then we just have to have the courage and the work ethic to put in what it takes to pursue them and to believe that we can achieve them. Now, when I started my podcast, I didn't have a goal of I want 5 million downloads or I want 6 million listeners. I didn't have a goal of that, or I wanted to make $300,000 a year, although that would be pretty nice if anybody wants to sponsor Christian Outdoors.
Yep.
Just repeat at christianoutdoors.org. We can talk. That wasn't a goal. My goal was I love the outdoors. I love Jesus. I want a place where people can talk about it. That was my goal. So you create that and you could commit to it. And, I had a conversation just, what is today, Monday on Friday, with some guys who are doing a podcast. I'm not going to say who they are. And they've been doing it a couple of years and they're struggling, like getting 3,000 a year downloads. And we just talked. And the thing that I told them, and I think you'll agree with this, is you got to commit to it. You got to say, I'm going to do 1 episode a week or whatever you decide to do, or 2 episodes a week, period. And being a former pastor, I looked at it and said, well, Sunday's coming. I better be ready. Right. Because Sunday's coming. People don't care what you've had going on that week. Sunday's coming. You better have a message ready. And I took that mindset into it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do 1 a week. And no matter what, I'm going to do at least 1 a week and commit to it. Decide why are you doing it and what you want to accomplish. And for me, the why was I want to talk about the outdoors and I want to talk about Jesus in the same place. Because in my writing, I can't do that. Peterson's Hunting is not going to publish about God. Right. And Sports and Field's not either. There's not one out there. So I'm like, well, everybody that I know are people of faith in the outdoor industry.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Right.
There are overwhelmingly more Christians than there are not.
Yeah.
And they don't have a platform either. So let me give them a platform, and it's, I just love it. I do. I love sitting here and hearing everybody's stories. I really do. I got one tonight at 7:30 that I'm recording. So
yeah. And I'm interested in why that is. Why is it that the mainstream groups won't post about it?
It's all about money,
man. It doesn't garner likes? Is it because it doesn't garner?
It's all about the money. Everything is about the money. Are we going to get the advertisers if we're talking about Jesus? Are we going to offend somebody if we're talking about Jesus? Are we, is Beretta going to buy a full page ad in my magazine that costs $15,000 for an issue if we're talking about Jesus in this magazine? It's always about the money. And because of, in my opinion, because of the fear that they won't continue to advertise, because in the print world, advertising dollars is what subscriptions do not pay for magazines. Advertising pays for magazines. Subscription covers the shipping and the printing, mostly just the shipping cost. Okay. It's the advertisers that pay for the magazines. And so if I start publishing stories where Jonathan wrote about experiencing God on an elk hunt in Utah, and Pete wrote a story about experiencing God on a turkey hunt in South Carolina, then I'm picking on Beretta. I don't know if they're a Christian company or
Yeah.
not, but then Beretta may say, you know what, we don't want to be associated with that. We just want to be focused on hunting only. We don't care about the spiritual side, blah, blah, blah. And I've had a lot of companies tell me that I've approached about sponsoring my show is we love what you're doing, but we don't want to put our name attached to Christian only because in today's world, as you said in the opening, it's almost a bad word, right? Christianity is being attacked by a lot of different angles and a lot of different factions, a lot of different groups. And so it's always about the money. And there was a couple that told me this, I can't say can't say who for obvious reasons, but they sent in a pilot to one of the hunting and fishing television networks. And in that pilot, they panned the room and there was a cross on a wall. And they turned down the pilot because of that. They said, if you take that out, everything else was great, but you got to cut that out. We can't have any religious symbolism whatsoever on the show. And he's like, but that's who we are.
Yeah.
So they went to a different network.
I wonder, is it because they're worried about like marginalizing certain groups of individuals that maybe aren't Christian? And so they're more okay with just leaving religion out of it completely, even though, because I don't know, I guess, and we're speaking hypotheticals here because we don't really know the decision other than the money, but I'm still curious as to why that would be the case where, you know, companies would be so concerned of even any kind of symbolism happening that they would, you know, garner any kind of, I don't know, not hatred, but like anti wanting that in there. That just
avoidance. I'm just going to use the word avoidance. They just avoid it because they don't want to deal with it. Right. Now there are networks, Pursuit Channel's one, that supports faith-based. Carbon TV. I was the first faith-based podcast on Carbon TV network on their podcast platform. They embrace it. They don't go seeking it, but they're not going to shoot it down if you have a faith-based message that you're including in your television show or in your podcast, which is awesome. So there are other outlets, right? Okay. But in the print world and in the magazine world, like if you're doing what's called hook and bullet stories, you know, catching and killing stuff, then you really can't reference that without prior permission and say, this is the angle of the story. I mean, you can say, you know, God brought me this big buck. Well, we know that's not really how it happens, but, you know, but they'll make a reference like that, you know, and I tell you personally, there's a couple of national magazines that I canceled my subscription in about 3 or 4 years ago because I started noticing profanity in their stories. And I actually wrote letters to their editors and called them because I have written for them. I said, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? I mean, children could be reading these. Well, that's how everybody talks nowadays. I said, not everyone. Yeah. Not everyone. There's no reason for it. It doesn't add to the story. It doesn't make it a better story. If anything, it's like, it's a flag for me.
And, you know, with that, like, I'm not, you know, I went through a spell where I just didn't care about profanity, but now I've gone through, I've flipped where I'm like, you know what? I need to be a better example for my kids. And those words every word that I say needs to have a meaning. So if I've gotten to the point where, you know, a curse word doesn't have meaning anymore, it's just part of my normal vocabulary, it's lost its meaning. Right. Whereas now, if I do drop one, it's in a very specific scenario for a very specific reason. And people know I'm extremely angry or frustrated. Like
I hit my thumb with a hammer. It's going to happen.
Yes, exactly. It's got that effect now versus if you just spit it out whenever, you don't get that effect of like, oh, he's like, this has a meaning now. And so, you know, and in print, it's weird because in print, like maybe in a fiction book or you're telling a war story or something like that, it adds to it in that aspect. But when you're just carrying a conversation in print or you're just writing it, I can't picture a spot where that would make sense because it doesn't have that effect as if it's dialogue. Like when there's dialogue and you drop it,
Right.
it's like, oh man, he's really emotional in some sort of way, really
Right.
emotional in this moment, versus in print, it's kind of like it's not really talking.
Yeah.
Read to read. If you want
Yeah.
talking,
Here
you
you
go to
are
YouTube.
reading about how to hunt rub lines,
Mm,
and they're using profanity. How does that
yeah,
help the story
it's like that.
whatsoever? I just want to
Yeah.
know how to hunt rub lines. I don't want to. That doesn't help me at all. And
Yeah.
here's my 13-year-old I'm trying to introduce into hunting and reading, trying to encourage them to read. So read about hunting, and then there's profanity in there. I'm like,
Yeah. And I
ignorant sense.
I'm not anti profanity by any means, but it's again, I feel like there's a time and a place.
Yeah, it's
Just like there's,
overused.
yeah,
Yeah.
just I can see that. But I also grew up in a family that's everyone served in the military, and so it's definitely a different culture.
It is.
Versus someone who maybe you grew up in a, I don't know, very strict Christian home. It's going to have a different effect. So anyway, long story short, kind of went off on a tangent there about profanity, but it's got a time and a place, and the whole idea of Christianity in print, that's interesting to me. I never thought about it like that, but I guess it makes sense because keeping, it's just like the taboo topics. You don't talk about money, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about politics at the dinner table, right? And what's funny is I talk about all three of those at the dinner table with my family. So
We do too. We do too. Yes.
But yeah, no, I get it. I mean, it makes sense because you don't want to marginalize certain groups. I get that as well. But I also feel like that almost portrays a not real sense of, like, if you go in the South and anyone that hunts or fishes in the South, there's going to be a Bible in their home or some sort of religion in the house. Like, that's just how it is. Especially if you have any Southern viewership, or if that's your main group of individuals, that's what you would want to include to get that, that
Right.
group. And that's why there's,
Right.
what was it, Darton? So I've never shot a dart and bow. I've heard really good things. And apparently this is the joke, guys. So this is a joke. Take it lightly here. But apparently Darton technology is in like 95% of bows out there, right? So that's the joke. I don't know how much of an archer you are, but the joke is that Darton just licenses their technology because they're the first to come out with a bunch of it, but they don't really make the best bow per se according to today's standards. They just have a lot of really good technology. Anyway, they put scripture verses on their bows, and they're not afraid or ashamed of it. But again, you look at it, and they're not the biggest flagship bow company like a Matthews or a Hoyt or a PSE. But I also know that each of those companies, like Matthews, for example, will post scriptures every once in a while on their page, especially around Easter or around Christmas. And so it's good to see that they know their base, and their base is, Christian homes, even if it is, like you said, Christmas and Easter, kind of deal. But still, there's that base. There's that base that they touch on. So yeah. Anyway,
well,
that's yeah.
That's awesome. I read years ago, so I need to verify this before I say it, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Is that mission bows by Matthews is 100% of those profits go to support missionaries. That's why it's called mission bows. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Mac McPherson and
that,
his
but if
wife.
that's the case, that's awesome.
Yeah, and Mac McPherson and his wife are worship leaders at their church, and they also he sings, and he also makes guitars, McPherson guitars. And so they're very involved in the church and very outspoken Christians. And that's why he created mission bows, was to make a more affordable bow for the beginner, but also a way to give back is that all the profits of it go to support missionaries around the world.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I don't shoot a Matthews either, and they don't sponsor me. I don't have a bow. I don't have a bow sponsor now. So if there's any bow companies listening to this and want to sponsor Christian Outdoor Podcast, unashamed, man, unashamed.
No shame. No, I just briefly looked it up. I don't have a young Jamie to be able to look stuff up while we're on the podcast here, but
I don't either.
Looks like at least a portion of it gets donated each year to mission work. So that's awesome. That's really cool to
Mm-hmm.
hear and to see that there's companies that do that unabashedly, and that's
Right.
really good. So awesome.
Let
Well,
me let me plug another company that I learned about recently. Is Hodgdon Powder.
okay.
They give 10% of their profits. They tithe 10% of their profits back to local churches. That's huge.
That's
like big. That's like real serious money right there.
Yeah.
You know, they are a very strong Christian company, and support their employees in that way, and have all kind of employee benefit plans for them in that way. And they give 10% of their profits back to local churches.
You'd almost say they're
As a
paying their
company.
tithing on their profits.
They're tithing. That's what they're
Yep.
doing. Is they're
Yep.
tithing. Like we should. Like we
Yeah.
should.
Exactly. No, and I couldn't agree with you more on that. That's you know, it's interesting because, you know, talking about tithing, God doesn't need our money to do what he wants, right? I mean, that's just the matter of fact. He doesn't need it. He doesn't. But
No.
it teaches us a lesson. It's just like, you know, I love being a dad for this reason, because I see so many parallels and I get glimpses of what God sees in us, and it blows me away. It hurts me sometimes when I get upset with my kids and I realize, crap, like that was not the best way to handle that situation. But the times where I'm really in tune and listening well on how to be the best father I can be, I get glimpses of what God sees in us as his children. And teaching my kids lessons, like most of the time, I don't need my kids to do half the stuff they do. If they're listening to this, you know this, I tell you this all the time. But I don't. I can do all of the things that I ask them to do, but I have them do chores or whatever it may be so that they can learn that lesson. So as they progress through life, they're now, hey, I know how to change a tire. Hey, I know how to do this now. And they've learned that lesson through doing. Tithing is a big factor of that. It's learning to manage your money and also giving back to a cause selflessly, right? I don't go and follow how the church uses my tithing, right? I know I pay my tithing each year, and I trust that the church is going to use it. And that's part of my faith, right? And again, he doesn't need his money. He doesn't need our money to do what he wants, because he, like you said, he could speak it into existence. But it's teaching us how to be better versions of ourselves, more, I guess, better stewards of what we've been given. And I kind of wish the government would do the same thing and just say, here's a flat tax.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't want to get on politics here now.
Yeah.
We'll be here for a long time.
I'll go down that rabbit hole too, man.
But yeah, on the tithing thing, just to echo what you said, is that God can do a lot more with 10% than we can with 100. Right? And it's act of obedience. He asks us to do it, to give of your first fruits, your gross, not your net. As I jokingly say to people, do you want a net blessing or a gross blessing? You know, you want to tithe on the net, but you want a gross blessing. Well, that ain't how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're supposed to be the first fruits, the Bible says. So we tithe off of the first fruits, and God gets paid first. And I taught all my kids, as soon as they started working, is you save 10% and you tithe 10%, and you keep the 80% and do what you want to with it. Take care of your responsibilities, but from their very first job is you save 10% and you tithe 10% and then you save 10% in that order, and then you budget the rest. And I don't want to say proud, because that's not the right word, but I'm very pleased to see that now that they are starting their lives as young adults and newly married people, that they're all doing that. And it's one of those things. If you can ever start practicing it, it gets easy. It's easy. It's kind of like when they take money out of your paycheck to put in savings for you. You don't see it, right? You do tithing the same way. Now that we have online tithing at my church, it's automatic. I set it up for recurring. Every time I get paid, 10% goes to church. Every time I get paid, 10% goes to church. Exactly. And it's automatic, and I don't miss it. And it's amazing what God can do with what's left. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. Just do it.
Exactly. Yep.
So,
I couldn't agree more. It's definitely something that can be implemented. And again, we're not saying what specific church or how to, where to pay your tithing. You can decide that yourself, based on
right.
your own faith and your own belief. But either way, whatever it is, giving of any kind, in that way is going to bless your life, because you're able to help others, and that's
It
a
is.
selfless service, an act of service, that you can do. And again, like you were saying, just easily, we've got a certain account that we just, our paychecks go here, a certain amount goes there. And, it's just like with a 401k or whatever it is, you tell them how much to take it
Right.
out, they take it out and they send it over there. You never see it. And then,
Right.
every once in a while you go in and check, you're like, oh man, okay, cool. Like, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been able to give that much,
Yeah.
or I've got this much put away.
Yep.
That's cool. But it
Yeah.
doesn't hurt if
Yep.
if it doesn't go into your hands and then back out. Like, just make it easy.
Right.
Right.
Although I will say, since I started online giving, I think the discipline of when the plate comes by, of actually putting it in there and demonstrating that to your children, right? Of every week, Dad puts an envelope in the plate. Every week, Dad puts an envelope in the plate, and they see that, and it drives it home. As opposed to the online giving, it's automatically done. They don't see me do that.
That's true.
And so it's I think there's a drawback to that, but I also see more and more churches today don't even have pass the plate. They just have a box out by the narthex. And I saw one that, 'cause I like to visit churches, and I speak at a lot of different churches. Is they had a machine by the door that you swipe your card on.
Really?
Yeah. And there was another one that on the screen where they had to give, text blah blah blah, text this number and you can give. Where they're doing that too, because so many people, and I'm an old man, I carry cash all the time.
Yeah, I bet your
I
wallet's
always
about that
have
thick too.
No, it's
got
not.
all
It's
all
not.
the receipts and everything in there from the last 5 years.
I actually don't do that, because I do online. I have online receipts. I take a picture of it and throw it away.
All right,
So
so
I'm
you're
like
not
a
that
hybrid.
old. You've moved
I'm
along
not
with the
that old.
times.
I'm not that old. I have a very thin wallet with one credit card in it, and I still carry cash. And it was funny because we were at this church the other day, and there was a fundraiser, so they were selling some things to try to make money. And my buddy who was with me was like, "I don't have any cash." I'm like, you always have to have cash. What if you break down and the guy won't take a car because he needs to tow you off somewhere? You gotta have cash all the time. Anyway, I'm off that soapbox. But yeah, I'm the guy who always has it. But I think I lost my train of thought. I think I was talking about the online giving versus giving in person. I think it makes a difference. The act of doing it is I was United Methodist pastor before they went haywire. They went off the deep end, boy. But one of the things that I liked about the tradition was when you had Holy Communion, was people got up and came forward. The act of getting up and walking forward, I think, makes you contemplate things a little more while you're standing in line and going up to receive the bread and the wine versus passing it down the pew. You're not physically doing something. Obviously, I'm talking about people that are physically capable of doing that. But that act of getting up and moving forward, I think, is important. And it's, to me, it just adds a lot more to it. And I've heard a lot of people say that as well, that there's sometimes these acts that we do make a lot more sense than we realize when we participate in them.
Right. Exactly. And again, going back to the actions, just there's so much, and it's so easy to create a little clip or talk, or and I've been, unfortunately, bamboozled a couple times by different things that just how would I put, they're too good to be true, right? And you want to trust, and you want to go off a handshake deal, or things like that, and but you haven't really done the research or seen the actions put in behind the scenes by said individual or group, and the action of whatever it may be, your faith, that quote or that scripture that says faith without works is dead. Show me your faith, and without works, and I'll show you my faith with my works, and And there's a reason for that. And unfortunately, when you get people involved, and I always tell my kids this, and just about anyone else this too, when there's people involved, it's imperfection all around. It's just because there's people. You don't know what their motivations really are, especially if you just met the person. And it's sad to say, because you want to just shake someone's hand and get to know who they are, just from that. But it's not always.
The handshake used to mean something, didn't it? The handshake agreement used to mean something.
Yep.
And I miss that. I mean, I'm obviously much older than you, but I remember those days when the guy shook your hand and said something, then that was going to happen, or he was going to die trying.
Yep.
Right. A man's word meant something, and it still does to me. If I give you my word, I'm going to do everything in my power to make it happen, or I'm going to tell you why I can't.
Yep.
Right. I just got my arm cut off in an accident, so I can't be there right now. But you're going to know that I'm on my way. Yeah. I may leak out on the way to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So, no, I think we've hit on some good points here with the, being out and I guess the last thing I want to wrap up on, you hit a topic that I've heard a lot of people say, that the outdoors is my church. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that to a certain extent. And I don't think I've ever actually spoken on, what my opinion is, and to whoever's out there listening that it matters to, here you go. And then I want to hear what you have to say on this. So you said that it doesn't replace church for you. I would agree with you on that, because there is something to be said, just like we've been talking about actions throughout this entire podcast, speaking things into being. There are Sundays, especially during hunt season, where I may not show up at church. But I also know it doesn't replace church itself, and I don't just replace it all year round by going up to the mountains or doing whatever outdoors with my family. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I do also feel there's a certain, when you go to church and you're around other people that believe the same as you and that have imperfections as well, which the church is a hospital for people.
Oh yeah, it's for the broken.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't go there expecting to find, and I find it ironic when people come out of there saying, well, so I know so-and-so, and I saw them cheating on their husband the other day. Or I'm like, well, that's why they're there. That means that they're at least trying to get better. Mm-hmm. Right. And so for me, there's a healthy mix. As long as, for me, you don't replace, you recognize church as something. For us, we have temples as well, which is even more sacred, where you go in and there's certain covenants that you make with your Heavenly Father in the temple there. Then you've got your church buildings, which you go and you're around people that are also sick in a way, spiritually, that they're trying to get better, right? You're able to find people that you can serve, fellowship with, and get to know your neighbors. And then there's church, or I don't call it church, I just call it being close to God, feeling the Spirit in nature. And there's so many things to that you can go out, and if you can just sit down. And my son even came back from camp out this last weekend, where they carried all their stuff up to this cabin in the snow. They drug it up in sleds, and then they sled down the next day. And up in this cabin, there was no cell phone service. There was no, any of that. And he came back, and he's 17. So obviously right in the midst of everything that's being thrown at him electronically. He said, Dad, it was really nice to not have my cell phone and forget I had a cell phone for a while. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's exactly it. We're just being pulled in so many directions that when you do have a chance to go up and enjoy nature for what it is, mm-hmm. It's a whole nother level. It is. So,
it really is. Yeah. It really is. I like being away from cell signal personally. But if I may give my view on that, is that, God tells us in scriptures that we're not to forsake the assembly of others, that we are to gather together where 2 or 3 are in my name, that I'm in the midst of them. And there's plenty of other scriptures that supports why we should be in church. I want to speak to the men very briefly. Is there are statistics that show that when dad is in church and leads his family to church, there's a 93% chance that his children will become believers and stay in church as adults. 93% chance. And one of the things that men are hardwired to do, Jonathan, is to be protectors of our family. We want to protect them from harm, not just pedophiles and from drugs and from bad decisions, but we need to protect their eternity. That needs to be the number one thing that we are focused on, is how can I protect their eternity? If we want to have an impact that lasts generations, then we start by taking our family to church and we model for them the importance of a relationship with Jesus Christ, because that is going to change their life and therefore change their children's lives. And it just goes on for generations. And we're so consumed in I believe, in our American society of being the He-Man protector. We're going to protect them from harm, and we're going to make sure that they get to go play travel ball or get to go to dance class. We get to provide all these things, but are we providing them with a route to live forever in the presence of God, which needs to be our number one priority? Yep. And we start that by going to church. I'm like you. I miss a lot of Sundays because of my job. I travel a lot. I've been traveling since the last weekend of February until this past Saturday. I've been in a different state and a different area, speaking at different places every weekend. I have missed my home church for 5 straight weekends, but I've been in church, but I haven't been in my church. I want to be in church. And so it's very important that when you can, you are, right. And make sure that you have a reason and not an excuse. Okay. Obviously, if you work on Sundays, you're a doctor, you're a law enforcement, you're in the military, whatever, you work on Sundays, you got a good reason why you can't be there. But because you don't like the pews or chairs, you don't like the music, or you don't like that there is no music, or you don't like
down the street.
Whatever it is, those are just a bunch of excuses, And so, as I tell my children, if you don't want to cut grass because it's hot, that's an excuse. If your leg's broke, you got a reason. Right. So
you're nicer
be
than
in
me.
Church.
I'd say go get.
I say, okay, we got a riding mower, so get on the riding mower and cut grass. All right.
Hey, you
take
got
your
one
crutches out
leg,
to the lawnmower.
Okay? Lean against the lawnmower; it'll roll with you. Okay.
That's right. That's what I said. We got a riding mower, so what's your reason? I got nothing here. Okay, you don't have to weed eat, but you got to go get on the rider and ride around the yard.
Well, and
we cut
agree
3
with
acres
you on that.
here. So,
I like to think of it as, if you were sitting in front of Christ, would you feel comfortable telling him, this is why I didn't, or I did do XYZ thing? As simple as that. You don't need to explain it to your bishop. You don't need to explain it to anyone else. If you could sit in front of him and say, I didn't show up this day or this time for this reason, or I did XYZ thing for this reason to Christ, you should be fine. You should be
good to go.
Who cares what everyone else says,
Exactly. Jonathan, thank you for having me on your show.
Of course. I appreciate you hopping on and sharing your faith here. I think this is probably the most I've spoken about faith on the podcast. I really wanted to dive into that today and clarify some things I know I've been asked before. It's not a favorite topic. It's just like you said, politics, money, things like that. It's not a favorite topic, but I went and served a mission in Mexico for 2 years talking to people about it because it's a passion of mine, and that hasn't gone away. It's just I've had some other things be more of a priority, like being a dad, than going around knocking doors and talking about Christ. So with that being said, I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you guys?
Thank you for having me. ChristianOutdoors.org is my website. Every episode I've ever done is there. We're also on YouTube under Christian Outdoors. Everything's under Christian Outdoors, whether it's on Instagram, Facebook. It's just Christian Outdoors, and you'll find us.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to leave the links down below, guys, for those out there that are looking for a community, an outdoors community that is Christian based. I've got a couple that I'm a part of, but it's not nearly as Christian based as directly Christian Outdoors podcast. So I'd highly recommend you go and check them out if you're looking for that refreshing, splash of cold water after hearing about all this other stuff and lack of faith out there. Recommend that you go and check out what they have to offer. So I'll leave the links down below. Again, thanks so much, Pete, for hopping on. And like I always say, guys, get out, live your life, and love it. Man, that was a great conversation. I'm really excited to have shared this one with you guys. I appreciate Pete coming on and sharing his faith, sharing his experience in the outdoors, how his life has been changed because of the outdoors. And hopefully maybe you can share this with someone that that need something along these lines to help get them into the outdoors to live a happier, healthier, more successful lifestyle that we aim for. Now, guys, I do just want to remind you that we have these 2 days, today and tomorrow, if you're watching this on Saturday, until the end of June, to get in on the over $2,000 worth of archery equipment giveaway that I've got going right now. Definitely go check that out. I really appreciate all the support and everything that you guys are doing with that to be a part of the channel. I want to get back to you and just say thank you. So there's that. And also, if you liked this video, drop a comment down below. Any questions you have for me, for Pete, for his podcast, drop them down below. Anything that may have popped into your mind while you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel. And if you're listening on the audio only version, follow along and leave a review. It's easy, simple, and it goes to speak volumes. It helps me a ton here at the podcast as we continue to grow the podcast and let people know that you appreciate the show with your opinions. So thank you so much. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and let's wrap this June up in an amazing way. Have a great weekend. Go make some memories with family and loved ones. And of course, get out, live your life, and love it.